Hello, everyone. Let's see who's here. Say a hello in the chat if you feel inclined. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I'm going to actually pin the mic to my work apron. Let's see, I see some new people here. Hi, Maestro. Hi, Marilyn. How's everybody doing? Hi, Renee. Hey, Leslie. Okay, how's camp going for everybody so far? I hope you brought your stuff to work on, and I am going to expand upon kind of this whole month's Tuesday tips. I don't really call it Tuesday tips, but the posts I do on Tuesday, I'm just going to expand on that a little bit. Leslie says the camp is going well. Fun times. Yeah. Camp is a lot of fun. I was hoping to take us outside so I can uh, do what I'm going to do today using like the forest. But first it was rainy this morning, then it cleared up, and I thought, oh, good, we can go outside. But when I went outside, it was so windy, my easel wouldn't stay up. And I thought, with the feedback of the wind, it probably isn't a good idea. So, some of you may actually recognize this from several Wonder-Filled Wednesdays ago. And I really wanted to finish up the drawing series that I was doing on Tuesday with this. Hello, W. Grant. Welcome, Ethel. Good to see you. Good to see you too, Nathaniel. So I'm gonna talk about values today, and for those of you who are joining me for the one of the intro to drawing workshops that begin in September, this is a little preview of something we go deep, deep, deep into. And for those of you who have yet to join us, if you're on the fence, this will give you an idea of something we talk about in the any of the intro to drawing classes that I offer in this fall. So it'll just kind of give you an idea of how deep we go. We go pretty deep. But, and then for those of you who have chosen not to, for whatever reason, which is awesome, I'm just happy you're here at Cricklewood. Hopefully you could take what I show you today into the field with you. So we're going to talk about values. So Tuesdays for the month of July was all about drawing, and I was focusing, because there's so much that I could talk about with drawing, but I was focusing specifically on values because it's my personal opinion that while everything is important, proportions, making your marks, blocking in, all of that, it's really values that make or break everything when you're drawing, and then by extension when you paint. If you can nail your values down, it doesn't matter what your colors are. You can also be forgiven for having your proportions slightly off. Although I'll tell you, once you start to look at things in terms of value, it helps you fix your proportions. But even if you decide for artistic reasons you want to have something just a little bit off scale or whatever, as long as you nail your values, it's still going to have truth to it. It's still going to look realistic. So I hope that is that makes sense, but it'll become clear as we work. So I'm going to just explain some basic concepts, and then and show you what I mean, because it's so much easier to just show it to you. And then we're going to apply it to our foxes here, and to our tree here, so you can see how it applies to what you are drawing. And for those of you who are working on your camp projects, yay! If you discover something awesome while you are working in your journals from whatever reference you're using, feel free to just pop in the chat. And we love spontaneous outbursts about nature here. Okay, I'm going to try to move us in closely. I'm kind of working on a whole different setup here. I hope I don't knock the camera down. Okay, let's see if I can make this a little higher. I want you guys to really see what I'm doing here. And let me zoom in. We'll get back to the fox in a little bit. This isn't sexy, what we're about to talk about, but it is necessary. And I'm hoping it makes it clear. Okay. All right. Let's hope this thing doesn't tip over. Hold on. Let me weigh it down. Okay. So you can pretty much think of everything in terms of a shape. And anything organic, meaning anything nature made, including humans. I think the best shape to think about is round. I know that when we block in a lot of our birds and our animals and other things in nature, I always start with a square, but honestly, I'm always thinking in terms of values in the round. And so, especially organic matter, the circle really represents, I think, pretty much everything. I'm using the same light source as the fox and her kit, so the direction is still coming in this way and slightly tilted like this, which is why we have the ellipse. So we're going to go back to, this is actually a 7 value scale. This one I had here was this 7 too? Oh, this was 7 as well. Sometimes you can simplify it even more into 3 values, 5 values. You can have as many jumps as you want. The important thing though is we are always working from big to small with everything, whether we're putting down our parameters or lines or we are blocking in our values. So back to values. Let me put this back up again. So from last week and also yesterday, whatever your value scale is, you're always going to have a dark end and you're always going to have a light end. And then you're going to have steps in between the dark and the light. You can start with just the light and the dark, the lightest and the darkest, which is what I did here. It's not the lightest and the darkest. I'm basically saying this is my lightest, and then for this is the darkest, and then just ignore that. So this is what's called keying your values towards the light side of whatever your value scale is. I just did that in terms of not going too dark too soon. But just by keying it where you've got a highlight or your lightest part of your whatever paper, in this case I'm working on tone paper, so actually my white pastel has to be my lightest. Then here's a mid-tone or a half-tone, here's a half-tone, ignore all this, and this is the darkest side. So I'm using basically a 4-step scale, and I haven't even put the lightest one part in yet. I could though. right there. That could be the lightest I can go, and the lightest in terms of where the light is hitting. So back to the value scale. So basically, you've got as light as you can go and as dark as you can go, and all the steps in between. All the steps in between are called your halftones or midtones, and it's all in this area that you make something appear to pop off your page. Make it look realistic, make it look three-dimensional. And your midtone is usually just that center, the one that lies dead center between your lightest and your darkest. That is your midtone or your halftone, and then from that you break it all out and get more refined. Does that make sense? Let's see, some new people joined. Hey Maria, hey Laura, hey Diane. Okay, so it's in those halftones where the realism lies when you're drawing or painting. It's always best to look at your subject, whatever it is and however complex it is, and start out by just dividing it into two different values, your lights and your dark. And then within that, you can divvy up your halftones, where some will kind of be on the darker side and some will live in the light side. So here I've got this sphere, or it's called a value sphere. And I have divided it up into basically, I'm using 4 tones. My lightest, that's as light as I can get in the area that is being hit by the light and then reflected back into our eyes as the viewer. That's what a highlight really is. And it'll move depending on where the person stands. But as the artist, we decide where the viewpoint is by placing this, what's called a specular highlight. Then I've chosen to divvy this up between a light side of the sphere and a dark side of the sphere. I'm using what I'm right now considering my darkest against my lightest, and then I've broken it up into 2 halftones where I've got a halftone here on the light side, and then behind the sphere I've got another halftone on the surface that the sphere is sitting on. And then here I've got another shadow, and I've grouped it all as one big shape. So when you are looking at something and you've got it blocked in, you have your proportions all laid out. Now you're going to try to make it look three-dimensional. Look at it in terms of what is light and what is dark. And the best way to do that is to squint your eyes so that less light is hitting your retina. And it took me a while to actually squint my eyes and let my brain just recognize that there are dark shapes and light shapes. You're not even identifying what you're looking at anymore, except in terms of light and dark. I wear glasses, quite thick glasses, and it wasn't until I pulled them off my face. It's similar to basically what a myopic person is looking at without their glasses. So you're just trying to squint your eyes down and cue into things that are just light, bright shapes and things that are dark shapes. And in terms of the sphere, if I were to be looking at an orb that was lit on one side, I would see that right at this edge of the orb, as it curves around, the light can no longer hit in this area. And I left some schematic lines. Normally I'd pull these out, but I wanted you to see that these are actually the light lines. So You've got the light coming in like this, and it comes like this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. These are all rays of light. They hit the sphere or the subject, light lights it all up, and then there's a point of the subject, because it's round, where all of a sudden the light can't wrap around. It just goes straight. And so this whole side of the sphere gets no light. So it's dark, it's in shadow. And here's where we start talking about the different kinds of shadow. If you have a subject such as a sphere, a mountain, a rock, a fox, a bird, a human, as they round in space like a sphere or a cylinder, there's a whole side of them where the light can't get to. And that's what's called a form shadow. It is a shadow made simply by the form of the subject, by the fact that it rounds away from the light and the light can't reach certain parts of it. And then our brains can perceive that as a form, the body of a fox, the head of a person, the side of a cliff, you know, all of that, the way a tree trunk rounds away. And because the light comes straight down and can't curve, so it can't hit this side, it also can't hit in between these two rays of light at the edge of the subject. And so what happens is the subject is blocking the light from hitting the table. The light can hit here, it can hit here, but it can't hit between these two lines. And then you have to think, we're looking at it like this, but that sphere is also curving this way too. So no matter where the light is coming from, it's blocking basically what is the shape, or a morphed version of the shape, and casting a shadow. And that's the second shadow that becomes very important, cast shadows. That's simply the subject or something, and that's why I think of it as something is blocking the light from reaching something else. This sphere is blocking the light from reaching this flat surface. Let's just call it a table. Sometimes when you're doing bird feathers, you'll hear me say this when I'm drawing. I'm often putting in the cast shadow between feathers. Of course, I don't have a drawing of a bird close by, but we'll do this on the fox too. It sometimes can be these tiny little micro cast shadows of one section of fur blocking the light of another section of fur, or the muzzle of a fox blocking the light from hitting part of the muzzle of the kit, which we're going to explore in a minute. So you've got these two very, very important shadows. Form shadows, which are caused literally by the form of the subject and the parts of it that round away from the light that the light can't reach, and that helps us perceive the form. So we use that when we draw to describe. And then we've got cast shadows. And so I'm just going to go ahead and darken this up, because what we have here, when you first block in your shadow, it helps to group your shadows into the biggest shape you can get. So we've got form and cast shadow, but it's all like one big shape is how I put it in. And then you go in and you start to refine that. So in a sphere, there's a part where this subject meets because it sits on this table. We're just going to call it a table, the surface. And it's going to be the darkest, absolute darkest part that the light just can never get to, because it's where you've got two forms meeting each other. And from there grows out this form shadow. Again, I'm keeping it pretty uniform. Now, there's a name for this line right here. It's not a line, it's a shadow. It's called the core shadow. And it is the point on your subject where the light drops off. If you're thinking of this in terms of planes, there's a plane right here, and a plane right here, and a plane right here, and a plane right here, like a disco ball, little facets. And it's that moment where this light plane meets this shadow plane, and now this whole form rounds away. And this shadow tends to be rather dark, and then everything else builds out from it. And it just gets darker and darker and darker. And then remember, this is a sphere, like any kind of organic structure. It rounds in 3 dimensions. So this side is going to be really dark. This side is going to be really dark. And so this form shadow helps describe the form and the part that the light just can't get to. So then we have our cast shadow that has to sit between where the rays of light come through. Oops, that's too dark. And it, again, builds out from where one object meets another object. It also is darker at the point where it meets that subject and gets lighter and more diffused as it goes away, as it gets farther and farther away. And so now we're getting into this realm. We're not here yet. This is this. The darkest we can get is right under here, where these two objects meet, and there's no way light can get in here at all. But we're kind of in this dark halftone right here and right here. And it's going to get real dark in here too, because there's no way the light can get in there. But it gets a lot more diffused as you get into this realm. Because as it starts to move away from the source of light and what's blocking it, other things in the atmosphere start to reflect light back into here. And that causes another phenomenon that you have to look for when you're creating something realistic. Is there's a moment when light reflects back into a shadow. Light's coming this way, but it's also coming this way and this way and this way. It's coming in one direction, but it's dispersing as it gets farther and farther in the atmosphere away from the source of light. It can also bounce off of things. So like this is coming down here and it's down here too. It's hitting this surface and it's bouncing some light right in here. And so this is where that division, so you've got that division where this is the light side and this is the dark side. Light, dark. And we're still in a dark halftone. and I mentioned this before, to keep it real, your lightest dark cannot be lighter than your darkest light. So we put this in. So what does that mean exactly? It means that where the light hits here and bounces back into the viewer's eye, it's going to be the lightest it could ever get. But as it curves around away from that, things start to get darker and darker. And so, let me get my pencil. And so we're at the core shadow. So from the core shadow, you start to have these halftones. So what's happening here is this is the brightest and lightest part, getting the most light, and coming up from the core shadow where the light just drops off and disappears, you have these halftones building. And we use that to represent the 3 dimensions. So we're getting into now this realm. This becomes our descriptor. This is where the realism lies. It's in the halftones. So by coming out from the core shadow, which I would say is our dark, we start to make something look a little bit more 3-dimensional, a little bit more round. So here is my darkest light, right up along the core shadow, which represents probably somewhere, a jump somewhere between the darkest dark, which is right there, and the lightest dark, which happens to be our reflected light. It's the bounced light that hits the surface and bounces back. And so the core shadow sits probably right in here somewhere, in a micro shade in between. So here we go. We're at this. This is our our darkest light. And then we're getting into, this actually is our halfway midtone right here. And then we're going to end up, as we get closer to our highlight, we get into our lighter halftone. And then our lightest halftone before we are completely light. And then I like to use a pencil to blend things. Okay, so that's not the most elegant looking thing. So I'm going to actually, if I'm looking to assess, and this is what you do when you're actually drawing any subject, you get your values calibrated some way to describe. the form. So the form shadows will give us an indication of how the form occupies space. Its mass. It makes all of a sudden this seem solid rather than just a circle. Our cast shadows also help determine how solid something is because it's blocking light. It's giving the appearance that it is blocking light. It has mass. And so that's what the value is doing. But now we want to assess, because we don't want our lightest dark to be equal to or lighter than our darkest light. And it is kind of getting that way. And so we solve that by darkening up our darks. So I'm just going to put, and you do that with, if I'm working in graphite, I do a glaze of graphite. If I am working in watercolor, I add a glaze to deepen it up with watercolor. If I'm working in oils, it's the same thing. So whatever medium you're working in, colored pencils, you put a glaze to darken it up. And there are ways to do that I've explained before using the Munzel palette. You take down its chroma, you deepen its color, you put a complement in, something like that. So darken that up. And I'm going to kind of blend it out. I'm going to just darken that lightest, the darkest light. If I have to do that, I have to darken that too. Do you see how it kind of just solidified everything? I'm just going to go ahead and put a tone in there. Does anybody have any questions about what I just did? Does this make sense? This is very abstract because we're just working in a sphere, but we're going to take everything that we just did here and we're going to apply it to the foxes. But while I move the camera back, if you have questions, now would be the chance to ask. And I will get this in frame again. I think that'll be okay. Let's see. There we go. Just want to make sure this is locked into place. Okay. No questions so far? Was this too technical? Too much? Boring? I'm just sharpening pencils. Let's see. I'm going to work with my 2H. Okay. Okay, so taking what we did here and applying it to the foxes, because what we have is I'm using the same light source. So what happened, this light source is the same as what we're going to use for the fox overall. So we've got a tree over here, which you can only see part of down here. We've got Mama Fox and we've got her kit. Let's see, W. Grant has a question. Oh, thanks. I'm glad this was helpful. Oh, yes, I work. Okay, so W. Grant said that my leads are really long, and these are actually quite conservative. If I'm working larger, they can be a little longer. Yes, I'm working with a really light touch. I tend to hold my pencil pretty far back. If not kind of in the middle, I'm holding them far back, and I'm working and I'm layering. I have paper that it's smooth, but it's got enough tooth that I can build up a lot of layers. And I'm using Tombow pencils, which are notorious for their strong leads. So I can get away with this. Sometimes they're a little shorter, but yeah, my main thing is you have no idea how many like lead holes I have in my arms and hands because I accidentally poke myself. But yes, I'm working with a really light touch and I'm building layers. This is all made possible by building layers. Oh, so Leslie, who has been part of Cricklewood for a while, actually painted these foxes when we did it the first time around. Yeah, even I look back at stuff and I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. That's why this is a slow process. This isn't quick sketching. However, I will tell you, I'm going to take you through a process right now that will show you how to quickly block in some tones that you can do in the field when you're sketching nature, doing your field studies or nature journaling or whatever you want to call it. We're going to start with that and then we're going to refine. So just so that you know, I'm using a pretty soft lead, which is a 4B. I'm using a middle of the road workhorse lead, which is HB. It's the equivalent of a number 2 school pencil. And then I'm using a 2H. These are the pencils that I recommend, either a 4B or a 2B as your darkest pencil, and always an HB and a 2B. This is what I recommend for all my courses, so that you know. Because with these 3 pencils, you can get all these different halftones, your darks, your lights, everything. All right, so let's apply what we did here. So we've got 3 solid forms: Mama Fox, Kit, and the tree. And right now they look like they're kind of all in a freeze, that they're just lined up on the same plane because it's just a line drawing. They are lined up. It's our job to use this technique to then start to construct them in 3 dimensions. The kit is tucked under Mom, but kind of in front. And the tree is back behind both of them. They are, so if we were looking at them overhead, the tree, let's see, let me make sure. Okay, if we're looking at them overhead, the tree is right here, Mom is right here, and Baby is right here. So they're not even lined up in the same place. They look like they are right now, but it's through value that we're going to separate them and break them apart and put them where they're supposed to be. Okay, so I have some shading in here that I really didn't want to pull out, but when you are sketching in the field, the best thing to do is to think in terms of 3 values: this one, and this one. The darkest you can get your medium to go, the lightest you can go. Normally that's going to be the color of your paper. You don't need a white chalk. It's going to be the color of your paper because I'm assuming you're working on a warm white or a white. And then whatever the layering of your pencil lead to get it to be a jump equal distance between your darkest and your lightest. Let me just, oh, Maria says the scene is totally adorable. Isn't it sweet? I love it. So let's start with that then. And I'm going to go in normally I like to start, well, I like to start with my lightest pencil to block in the shapes. So again, we squint down, we look at our subject. I gotta get my, there we go. Okay, and we squint at it, and we're telling our brain ignore the color and group everything together. So when I squint at my reference, I'm seeing a very dark shape right here. So I'm just going to take my pencil and lightly put it in. I'm seeing a very dark shape right here. I'm not even identifying what it is. I'm just identifying the darkest shapes that I see. I'm seeing a very dark shape right here. And I'm squinting my eyes, and I'm just trying to put that shape in. And I'm using my lightest pencil, my 2H, simply because I'm trying to get these as equal as possible. Meaning this tone can't be lighter than this tone. It has to be kind of the same. I'm seeing right here. I'm seeing also right here. There's like a triangle shape of shadow right there. And again, I'm ignoring color, and then it just extends into kind of an oblong right here. And kind of comes up. And I'm thinking in terms of broad, not little tiny bits. That's why I'm squinting my eyes down real hard. Because this whole, there's like the shadow shape that comes up like this. And I'm ignoring the color of her fur. Just looking at that shadow shape. There's one right here. And when I squint my eyes, there's no division between the chest and the leg here. Just like when I put this shadow and this form shadow and this cast shadow, I put them in all as one shape at first. So I'm just what's called massing in broad shapes of shadow and kind of connecting them. So like I can even connect them to this shadow here. And I can connect this to this shadow here. And this shadow I can connect to that shadow. And then this one can connect to this one. And this one kind of stands alone, and this one's right there too. And so right now, everything I've put in is a form shadow. This shadow's here because her rib cage line, because remember, here's the light coming in this way. So the light's hitting here. Her rib cage rounds around, her belly rounds around, her chest. It all rounds away from the light, so I've got a form shadow here. I've got a form shadow here because her haunches, her hips are rounding into her haunches, so it creates a form shadow. Interestingly enough, right here, this is a cast shadow because it is cast by her body blocking the light from the inside of the leg farthest away from us, as well as this leg closest to us is casting a shadow there. This here is a form shadow. Well, this is a form shadow. I'm sorry, this is the form shadow. This is a form shadow with a bit of cast shadow from here to here. Form shadow. Tiny bit of cast shadow here, but basically a form shadow. Form shadow. Form shadow as her shoulder rounds towards her chest. Cast shadow because her body is blocking the light to this area. Does that make sense? And so up near her face, what I've got here is a cast shadow right from her muzzle, casting a shadow onto her neck. Right in here, I'm going to darken that up too, is a little cast shadow again from her jaw, blocking some of the light from hitting her neck. But then right here, I've got a little bit of a form shadow. And right here, I've got a little bit of a form shadow as her shoulders round into her chest and away from the light, which is hitting here. Okay. All right. Awesome, Ethel. Yeah, you'll be hearing this and more. We're going to have lots of practice in our wildlife drawing, introduction to drawing realistic wildlife. So consider this a preview, everybody, and enjoy. Okay, so just within her, I'm just kind of, now you would think right up here there's dark tone, but there is a tiny little shadow right here that is caused by the form of her ear. But you would think that all of this is shadow. It's not. She's got dark fur, and we're going to ignore her fur markings right now, but we want to put this shape in because it kind of indicates her ear curling. There's a little shadow right here. Same thing. So I'm squinting my eyes and I'm trying to get that shape right. And the reason, again, why I'm using the 2H pencil is it's lighter. Nothing is that permanent because it's easy to pull back if I had to, and I can layer over it to make it darker. Okay. Okay, so Ethel says she's having a hard time making out the ear shadows. Yes, and it gets easier when you are looking at things in real life. Photographs are terrible, but they are what we have and they're great to practice. Try to squint your eyes down so that, how do I explain it? You squint your eyes down so that you almost don't even recognize that that's a fox that you're looking at. All you see are light and dark blobs. And you might have to kind of like zoom in on the photo to be able to really see it. But we're going to practice this a lot. But you just kind of, it's hard when you've got dark fur or dark feathers, but you will get accustomed because you'll know what you're looking for. You're just looking for that shape, that kind of little crescent shape right here. So squint your eyes and just stare at the ears for a little bit. And you'll start to see that in that dark, that big dark area, there's an area that's darker. That's your shadow. Yeah, because you're not used to it yet. You will begin to discern that. So just like I said, just squint at the ears for a while and you'll start to, and just kind of let it absorb in. You'll see that there's a lighter dark area and a darker dark area. And that's the form shadow. Okay. We'll practice this more. She's got a lot of form shadows with fur that's kind of making it hard to tell. Is it fur or is it, yeah. Okay, she's got form shadow right here too. And a bit of cast shadow right under her eyelid. So I'm gonna just put that in. And then there's form shadow. Again, oh, here's a good one to look at. So for Ethel and anybody else who's having a hard time, and like I said, it took me a while to be able to see this. So just stick with it and keep practicing. On her muzzle, you'll see, so her muzzle is that beautiful auburn color, but you'll see lighter auburn here and darker auburn along the side of her muzzle. That's actually not darker fur. That's a form shadow as her muzzle begins to round away from the light. And I'm actually looking, and I need to straighten this line up because the form shadow I put in is the wrong shape. Okay. Oh, you're welcome. Everybody, just ask questions. I'm happy to take us through it as many times as we need to go through it. All right, I'm gonna, okay, right here too, right under the ear, we've got a cast shadow, the ear blocking the light here. And then right here by the ear, we have a form shadow as her forehead rolls back and meets the ear and the side of the head. So here we've got cast from this ear, and here we've got form because the brow. Here also. And if you look, I did that form shadow upside down. So I'm going to take that out. So there's a form shadow right here, and one right here that's kind of an extension of this one, coming right up to the center of her head. And then there's a little divot in her head, so that's another form shadow. Let's get this out of there. Right in here, the little form shadow. Okay, let's do the baby too, because there's some stuff happening here. So what we've got here on the baby is actually dark ear fur, but we also have an entire shadow that is caused by the fact that the baby's ear is away from the light, and a little bit of a cast shadow right in here, but we're not going to differentiate between the two right now. Just know that that whole side of the ear is part cast shadow. Near the head is the head blocks, and form shadow as that ear is flipped over and it's now the back side, similar to what we have up here. Now, it just so happens that we've got form shadow right in here. This whole head is form shadow. And the back of the neck. And then we've got a little bit of a little cast shadow right here, but we're not going to differentiate between the two. We're just going to mass it into the one big shadow. And then we've got a big shadow right here, again, because no light is getting there. And then we've got this tail that has dark fur and light fur, but we're going to mass it all in as one big shadow because no light is reaching there. The light is coming here. Baby is receiving light here, but then this is twisted away from the light. So this whole area, squint your eyes and you'll see this whole area is a big form shadow. Right here is a cast shadow from this leg, which, hold on. Yep. This is what I mean by when you start to put your values in, you start to be able to see your forms a little better, and you can correct them. I have to correct that one. It also is morphing into this belly shadow, which is form shadow. And then I've got form shadow all along this leg. And I've got both form and cast. Cast from the body, form because the leg is round under there. I've got form shadow here. And up in here, squinting my eyes, I can see it. This whole area is lighter. This is the brightest area right there. So if we're thinking the 3-value scale, lightest, mid-tone, darkest, and I'm using my paper as the mid-tone because I'm using toned paper, I've left all the mid-tones open, and I can see that there's the brightest part here. It's a bright part right there. Bright part right in the center. Really bright right up in here. I've got, well, I'm going to have to move something here. There's a really bright piece here. A really bright edge there on Mom. She's got a really bright edge right here because that's her shoulder blade catching the light. There's a bit, oops. There's a bit of light right here. And Baby has a really bright light right here, which you think is the white fur, but it's not. It's just that the light is hitting there. Okay, so one of the other things we've got going, because Baby is in front of Mom, but Baby is also receiving a cast shadow from Mom right here, right where Mom's muzzle meets Baby's muzzle. There's a cast shadow right in there. Okay, and let's do the tree while we're at it. So let me make sure what part of the tree you can see. Oh yeah, you can see this one down here. Okay, so we've got the tree. We've got a form shadow on this tree. And the tree's too far away for any of these to be casting a shadow. So we're just going to put that form shadow in. Right there. Okay, so even just doing the 3-value scale, you already have something that looks a little bit more 3D than it did at the very, very beginning. Let's see where we are on time. Oh, good. Yes, we're good. We're still good. Okay, so that's good for sketching. That's good for being out in the wild. And if you wanted to, and I do this a lot, if I know that I'm just going to be sketching with pencil and I'm not going to be painting or doing any kind of watercolor studies in my sketchbook, when I nature journal, I often will take my softest pencil, like a 4B, I don't know if you've heard of the Blackwing. They're called Blackwing mats. They're the ones with the black barrel. They're the equivalent of like a 5B pencil. They're very soft. And I will use one of those and sketch in my perimeter, get the proportions, and then just take that and actually make dark shadows. I will go for the darkest one and maybe put in some of the halftone, and then my paper is the white, just so that I have a 3-value scale that kind of pops it up a little bit more. But let's say we have more time. So, okay, I have the general shadows in here, kind of a little map, and I was very generous on kind of where these were. I mean, I could have even gone a little farther, but I didn't. So now I'm going to take like my HB pencil and I'm going to go back through these bigger shadow shapes and I'm going to darken them. So basically what I'm doing now is I'm breaking the dark areas up into these values. Not quite the darkest I can get, second darkest I can get, and then the absolute middle tone. So I would say I've just put in the middle tone. So now I can squint my eyes and start to think of where is the next deepest tone. Actually, I'm just gonna say we're here. So we've just laid in mass shadows, both cast and form. So now I'm going to go to my second darkest half, or my darkest halftone, the second darkest of my whole scale, but that's still a halftone. This, and this area is all my halftones. I'm going to look at my darkest halftone, and I'm going to start to pick out the darkest shadows that I see. I'm going to start with the baby. I'm going to start with this ear, because this ear is the darkest I can get, is the darkest shadow on the whole baby other than on the legs. So we're going to do those. So I'm using a real light touch. This is actually the edge of my pencil, but I'm not up here. If I'm up here, it's because I'm doing details. So I'm still kind of far away. And I am going to mask this all in to try to get it to be that darkest halftone. So I'm in this realm right here. I'm not taking it as dark as I can get it. I'm not here, and I'm not doing this yet because we save that for the very end. Otherwise, if you start from this area, you have nowhere to go. That's as dark as you can get, and if you've gone too dark, you can't lighten it up as easily. Or it just makes more work. So I'm just layering using my HB pencil, and I'm putting in the darkest. And I'm squinting my eyes at the baby. There's a tiny little micro shadow right here. It's actually a cast shadow from his upper eyelid into his eye socket. So I'm putting that in too. I'm going for my darkest shadows. So I'm staying away from here right now because those aren't the darkest. Right up in here, there's a shadow where this rib cage and the fur is casting a tiny little micro shadow right underneath. In this one, and then it rounds right up in here, right alongside the leg. It's a tiny little micro shadow right here. And I'm actually going to take my eraser and just kind of lift that up. And then I've got a dark cast shadow right in here. I'm going to put that in. And then it kind of lightens up as it gets to the other side here. And I just want to clean that edge up. Okay. The darker shadow shape within that shadow. So I'm going to put that one in. And then there's a cast shadow right here by his leg folding up. But there's also some form shadow here because the light can't wrap around. So if I were to look at the baby and say, where is the core shadow of said baby? It's right here, actually. This is the core shadow of our sphere. This right here is the core shadow of the baby. So I, in essence, could put that entire area in shadow and then start to break it down like I did here. So I've got a micro shadow that's caused by basically his haunch here, casting a shadow underneath his tail. And then I've got a bit of a cast shadow from the fur from his butt area on his tail. And then I've got a form shadow right here. So in the whole scheme of the baby, this could be a core shadow. But then his head has a core shadow that comes, hold on, let me see. The core shadow of the baby's head actually comes this way. Think of this as the sphere. It's actually coming like this. So that's like a second, that's another core shadow. This tail has a core shadow right along here. So it helps to be cognizant of where those are, but given that a fox, a bird, a human, a tree is all very a complex form. Nothing's as simple as a sphere except a sphere. You'll find that there are multiple core shadows, and it's just helpful to kind of clue into where they are, because there's also one that can be going the length of his body, because remember, he's in the round. It all depends on what light is bouncing off of what. But we're trying to simplify. So we've got a form shadow here. I'm just going for the darkest shadows that I see. We've got another form shadow on the back side here. And I'm always squinting my eyes. There's a little form shadow right there too. But we'll come back. Let's do the darkest shadows first. And we've got a cast shadow right in here. Okay. Just to keep everything even, Let's go to Mom and do the same thing. Let's start from her head. So I'm seeing actually the darkest shadow sits right here in her ear, on the top of her ear. And there's a small little one right here, but it's real small. She's got a cast shadow right there and a form shadow. Her eye is also, that eyelid is also casting a shadow on the lower. So I'm putting that in. This shadow is really strong. This is cast by her jaw. I'm not gonna do anything on the one for the baby yet until I get hers in place. She's got one right here. And here. And I'm now staying in the direction of her fur when I put in the shading. I'm still really light with my touch, but I need more control because I've got a lot of fur texture that I'm going to deal with. And so I might as well stay in the direction of the fur. Okay, let's address what's happening here. Think this area is this right here. So there is a cast shadow and the shadow that's caused by two forms meeting. So it's going to be darkest right under there, and then not as dark coming out from it. Okay, now baby has a form shadow. So here's the eye. It's also fur marking. So we can just use both. Let's just put some shade in here. Okay. So there's a shadow right here. It's just not as dark, but I'm going to put it in because we're here anyways. But then we get to some really dark areas right in here. And right here. And again, just putting the darkest shadows in. Here's a form shadow. And also a cast shadow. And here's a little cast shadow from the baby, morphing into a form shadow and cast shadow. Sometimes it's both things. Okay. Form shadow, it's just not as dark, but I'm going to darken it a little. This edge is a pretty strong shadow. And it kind of lightens as it comes up and around. So it's darkest on the edge, and then it morphs into the light, just like what happened here. Core, shadow, dark, 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 halftone, halftone, halftone. So I'm just going to kind of block in some of these. We're in the darkest light right now. And then along the edge is the lightest dark for now. Okay. Again, same thing here. We're at the lightest dark, and we're going to morph into the darkest light as we get closer to the light. And then we've got a little cast shadow caused by a fold of fur. Okay, and the same thing here. Lightest dark, and we move into the darkest light. Lightest dark, move into the darkest light, just like we did here. And this is what would be called turning the form. When you do something like this, you're going in light into dark or dark into light, you're turning the form. We start at the dark and go into the light, we're turning up into the light. Okay, I'm just leaving it like that. We'll refine that in a minute. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to continue. This is dark, dark, dark because we've got a cast shadow here. And it's the darkest underneath and near this leg. I've got, okay, so here's a blend of both, but squint. It's partial fur marking, but it's also partial muscle. And as you draw more and more animals, more and more birds, more and more people, whatever you're drawing, you start to be able to see that sometimes it's just not that simple. You've got form shadow here, but you also have a fur marking here where the fur got darker as well. But there's muscles underneath here, and so we've got some thigh muscle going on there. Okay, again, lightest dark into the darkest light. Same thing right here. Now, I'm not going as dark as I could because we've got some fur texture that we're going to want to put in. But I'm just kind of roughing in the most important darkest shadows for our purposes now. So here's a really dark one. This right here is a tiny little cast shadow. This is a form shadow. This is cast and form. Okay, backside of this tail. And I've got fur markings again. So I'm actually going to take my darkest pencil, and right up in here, it's the same where the light just can't get to. I'm looking at the shape. Yep. We've got fur, fluffy fur tail, fur. It's all in shadow, and the fur is changing direction. Okay, I'm going back to my HB. So here we have a form shadow because her haunch is coming around. There's a break in her fur, and you've got fur marking, but you also have a little cast shadow caused by the fur on one side casting a shadow on the other. This little bit right here is actually that break in her fur. It's a cast shadow. All right. And you can put some of the edge fur on the side of the pencil and also have it do double duty as a shadow because the fur is coming around. Let's see. It comes like this, comes like this, and like that. All right. Let me swing you around so you can see the tail a little better. And I'm gonna jump kind of to something that happens when we do any kind of fur texture, feather texture. Let's just stick with animals. I mean, it's the same if you draw human hair, but let's stick with birds and mammals. So we've got fur texture. There's a lot of fur texture going on here, and there's markings too. So the best way to handle when you are doing anything furry or feathery is you first think of the whole form. This is one unit, so this is one shape like this. And that shape is round like a cylinder. So this area, because the light is coming this way, this area is going to be, in its simplest form, the darkest. So I'm not even worried about fur texture right now. Think of the shape. Okay. So we think of it as a cylinder. It's round. I'm not even concerned with fur texture. We're just concerned with making it look three-dimensional. So if we take fur out of the equation, and we just do shadow and light, I always blend with my lightest pencil. So that's something we talk about in the class too. Is we don't use our fingers, we don't use a stump. We do, but we use it for a very specific purpose, not just to blend. We blend with our hardest pencil. It does the job. Okay. And because I'm working on tone paper, I will put in some of the lights. So that is basically the tail. That is basically the shading on the tail. So we now have to contend with fur texture. And so what we've got going is the form, the mass, and how light hits it. But we also have to now think of how each hair of fur, each clump of hair, each individual hair, how that's affecting the clump or the individual hair next to it. So with mammals, you have to think in terms of clumps of fur. So the clump of fur underneath has lights and darks, but mostly, especially on the far side, very dark, the darkest you can get. No light is getting to that because it's got a shadow from this part of the fur that comes out. So I'm using kind of lines, still a light touch, but I need more control so that I can alter the direction of the fur and start to pick out the part of the tail that is farthest from us. Okay. That was my darkest pencil. So I might as well cut into some of this fur up here. So I'm actually doing the shadows between these clumps of fur right here. Okay. I'm seeing a question come in. Maria asks, what is the white pencil I am using for highlights? Oh yes. It is a the 14 what is this? The 100 from Carbo Othello. It's a pastel pencil. A lot of people like to use white charcoal, or I don't. I like to use a pastel pencil. It's just the pigment is nicer and it's more opaque, and it's softer. It's not as colored pencil tends to be waxy. Chalk pencil tends to be gritty. This is smooth and not waxy. So it is a Stabilo Carbo Othello white, titanium white, and the number is 100. For those of you who are going to take Intro to Drawing with me, it's these 3 pencils that I recommend, and a red oxide pencil, also a Carbo Othello, and a white pastel pencil, because we are going to work with all 3. And I explain why you would want a red pencil. It's not for what you think. It has nothing to do with color and everything to do with warmth. Okay, so, but that was a good question. I'm always happy to nerd out with you over supplies. I love supplies. Okay, so that is kind of the under part of the fur. Then we're contending with still the part that's not getting the light here. So I'm going to my HB. I'm just going to shade everything in over here because it's not receiving the light. It's this part right in here. So I'm just going to shade the whole thing. And then I'm going to look at the fur and I'm going to see that there are, and I'm still using my HB, that there's some fur clumps that I can accentuate. So I'm going to do that and try not to be too regular in how I do that, and not do every little fur clump, just kind of just enough to say that's a fur clump. And I might want to dial some of that back because we've got some fur grain that we have to contend with here. Okay. Yeah, don't get me started on supplies. I love nerding out over supplies. Okay, so we're still kind of working in the dark and establishing halftones. And so each clump is casting a shadow on another clump, but it might not be as dark as, say, this under part, which is not getting any light. And so maybe I want to take a lighter pencil and kind of work into, so I'm actually working into the cast shadows of these clumps. And we've got a little bit of grain. So now we're headed into this light area right here. This can actually be shaded, but now we're headed into the light. And so here's the thing, when you again are using values to establish realism, things that are in the light have more detail than the things that are not in the light. So I'm not going to differentiate between the clumps in this really dark area because it's in the dark. That's not where the detail is. If you put detail in your darks, what happens is the eye, it's distracting. It distracts from the light. But now, and so here I've done a little bit of detail because I'm in the halftone area. This area, remember, we're dividing right down here, dark with our lightest dark, and then the light. So now I'm moving into the light so I can get a little bit more detailed and start to like really look at some of these clumps that are happening right in here. This has a definite grain, so I might want to put some of these little clumps, these clusters, right in there. This kind of splits right here, so there's a bit of a cast shadow. So I'm going to put that in, and it's doing it again right kind of in here. So that's a clump I might want to put in. There's a clump right here, and one here, and one in here. And then because I'm on toned paper, I'm going to add some of my light. There was a bit of light here, and there was one here, and one here, I think. And I leave it at that. And then I might want to take my hardest pencil and just shade, because see, this is rounding from the light. I might just want to quickly shade this part in. And down here, maybe blend up. And I'm seeing up in here. This is actually fur marking right in here and a little bit of cast shadow, but it's really just fur marking. And fur marking. And we've got a furry tail. Now, later, when I've done the rest of her, I may look and say, maybe I need to soften some of this up a little bit. I know that this is too much of a contrast, so I'm going to knock her leg back by just shading the whole thing, including over the dark that I've just done. And I might want to go ahead and just pick out some of the darkest part of the fur that comes this way. And think about the cast shadow that this group of fur is making on the fur underneath. I do the same with bird feathers too. I will put in the cast shadow of each individual feather group. And then by default, the feathers come out. Okay. Now, we're trying to do this in black and white, but we've got light fur, and then we've got darker, brighter fur. So we're going to shade the whole thing in, and then we're going to go over and just pick out some of this dark. Now remember, we are in kind of this realm, so we don't want it to have too much detail. So we put in some of the shading that indicates that this fur is darker, but then this whole area is darker too. So we just knock the contrast down. And I can see that this leg is not proportioned very well. Again, we've got shadow and dark fur. All right. I knew you guys were my kindred spirits. Any questions so far? Let's see. Let me zoom back out and move this way. So does that make sense? I mean, this is kind of real quick, and there's more to say, but we need a lot more time, like a week, to be able to do that. I'm looking at this though, and I'm saying this needs more shading. So I'm just going to glaze over it with some graphite, just to kind of darken it up. But so that affects everything that happens here. At this point, I would go section by section. I wanted to show you the tail first, just because I think it is the most apparent of what happens when you now start to create 3D form with fur texture, because that does change things a little bit. Also the anatomy. Now, I'm familiar with anatomy, and I let's see. I think I will, let's see, what book is a good one? I will put a couple books in the replay post. I think his name is it's either J.V. Andrews or J.C. and isn't J.C. Andrews the dude who wrote the book about the flowers in the attic? It's somebody else. It's not that person. Does anybody remember that really weird book from the 70s? I guess I'm not a horror fan, so it was a brilliant book, I'm sure, but I'm not a horror fan. No, this is somebody else. I will link to it because it talks about mammal anatomy. And so because I know that there's a spine here and there's a rib cage that hold on, breastbone. I will just put this in so you can kind of see, and this is also affecting the anatomy. Okay, so there is a rib cage that's kind of coming up here. Breastbone is right here, spine, then there's hips. There's like a right there, there's one right there. So there's like hips, there's a socket right in there. There's a little tailbone that comes off, and then the fur comes out, and then there's all these muscles. So that also affects your form. But if you can think in terms of these geometrics, think everything is round. It's either elongated like a cylinder, or it's round like that. And laying in those shadows first, kind of just blocking them in. And then when you go and refine like we did here, we start to look at fur direction, because the anatomy underneath and the way the muscles are determines the direction of the fur. Just like the hair on our head, some things grow forward, some things grow to the side, some stuff grows back, some grows down. It's the same with the fur on any mammal. And then with birds, it's a little bit more complicated in that some feathers are grouped in such a way because it enables them to fly. And so the feathers are in a certain direction so that they can fly. VC Andrews. Okay, then maybe this guy is JC Andrews. Yep. Okay. So let's see how much time. Oh, we still have a little bit of time. Shall I keep going? Are you guys sick of me right now? Let's keep going and let's address her torso. Okay, let me get my reference up. All right. So she's got fur that's growing down. So if I'm looking at the direction, her fur on the top. So oh, that's the other thing. We've also got planes. So this is a plane. It's got a plane here, 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 all these different facets. So the direction of the fur is going this way on her back. It's going this way on her rib cage. And then as we get to her belly, or her side, this is actually her sides, then it starts to grow this way. And then just because I know what her belly is going to be like, her fur grows this way on her belly, which we don't really see. So it's just like what we did here. You can take your pencil, and we've already mapped out this is the darkest part. And so we've got fur that is growing kind of side and back. And that's going to be the darkest. We've got light fur coming, but there's still this perimeter. So we can represent that by kind of breaking this up instead of making it one solid line. And then we can start to kind of move up into the fur clumps. So there's a clump that comes kind of up like this, down. And then one that's kind of right here. And one that kind of splits right in there. That kind of splits off this way. And one that's coming this way. I went too dark there, but that's it. And it hooks up into what's happening right here because we've got a clump of fur that's following that hip right up in here. If I'm thinking this whole section of her fur kind of comes up and comes this way and comes up, and it follows her anatomy. And then she's got some other stuff going on here that we're not going to address right now. So that was with my darkest pencil. Now I'm going to go to my middle, my HB, and I'm going to start to deepen these shadows. Because remember, it's coming away from the light. So up along here, I have to be in the darkest. But I can do that by putting in the feather texture, the fur texture. I do a lot of birds, so I'm sorry you'll hear me sometimes say feather when I mean fur. And if you look at her fur texture, it's kind of short in here. Now, we're in the shadows, so we don't really need to get all that detailed up in here, up in this shadow area. I probably even picked out a little bit too much in here. So let's see. So we're starting to get into this realm, and that is where we can have more detail. But I think before I do anything else, I'm going to take, oops, holding too many pencils in my hand. There we go. Okay, I'm going to sharpen my pencil because this technique really depends on your pencils being really sharp. Okay, so I'm using my HB, and now we're headed into the light. So I'm looking at the clumps. And again, I'm using the side of my pencil, very light touch. Sometimes I twist it so that it doesn't get a flat side and it stays sharp for a long time. So I'm just kind of going in. And just looking at some of the major clumps that would say, this is furry. And I'm seeing there's something coming around this way. And this is where your kneaded eraser is not an eraser. It's a drawing tool. And I'll show you how. So there's something called reductive drawing. This is something we'll go over in my drawing classes. But and then I can soften that with just a glaze of my 2H on that. And then there's a little haze. Now, because I haven't darkened the background, nor will I, we have to represent the haze in a different way. There's like just some fine little fur coming out. And it gets shorter as it gets towards her chest, longer as we get towards the belly. Now, why wouldn't I use my white pencil for that, given that that haze is white? Because when we draw like this, we're not thinking of this as a color. I'm not trying to put the white things in. I'm trying to put the light in just because my paper is toned. If my paper were not toned, I wouldn't even use this. It's the same with, this is not a red pencil. It's warmth. We're going to add warmth with this pencil. We're going to turn this cold graphite into warm graphite. And it's the same with this kneaded eraser. It's not an eraser. It's a tool that you use to pick out midtones and refine shapes and all that good stuff. All right. I'm going to keep going. Let's see. Why don't we go ahead and finish what's happening here? Because now we have we have markings from fur. So if you squint your eyes, you can see that this represents not only the fur markings, but it's also breaks in the fur and the anatomy. So here we've got the ball under here inside the hip, but then we've got the hip and the muscle right in here that's happening. So we've got a little bit of shadow in here. Here, not so much, but we do have this fur shape. So this clump of fur. And there is a form to it. It has a form. So let's see. Oops. It actually comes down here. This is the form. Yeah, we can just leave that. So do you see how that clump has a form? All right. And now we can use our pencil to kind of cut into this shape, which is a clump of fur, because right under here, this clump of fur is casting a shadow on the leg underneath. So I'm seeing it kind of come down like this. And then if you squint your eyes, you just kind of think of locally, what would that value be? It's lighter than this, but darker than this. So we look at our scale and we figure out, well, what's the middle part of that? And is there anything really important that we need to, information that we need to include? Because we can't include everything. And I think we want to have that separation of this fur clump. So I'm going to put the shadow that is from underneath it. And because we want that to be subtle and turn that, just like we did with this, into the halftones, we're just going to kind of blend that out. Okay. So this is starting to look kind of all the same. So that just means we have to darken up some stuff to make this appear lighter. And that's what happens. It's a balancing act. You put something in and you realize you have to darken other parts of it up. Now we're into the light, so we can put some detail in. And this clump is dark. And this is dark. Let's just put some of that in. And then I can use this tool, shape it any way I want. Just kind of pull stuff this way. Just kind of break up some of this line. That's always my thing. I have to go back and check always myself to make sure that I haven't made things look too regular, too uniform. I also have to once in a while go through and kind of clean up. Put this down here. So as you can tell, this is not a quick process, but it's very meditative, and it can get really fun. So there is I'm just looking right in here. Actually, take my darkest pencil. Where is it? Oh yeah. So you've got a leg here, but you also have a gap between the tail fur and the background. But one of the things that's nice is you can blur that edge. So it's still there. But we don't have to have, if I were to leave a little gap here to the background, all of a sudden your eye would be focused on this because of the contrast. What's nice is you can blur the edges. It's called it. This is something that helps also with realism. If you just observe your world for this next weekend, and you'll see that it's made up of hard edges and soft edges. You don't always see. So like this has a hard edge between this leg and the back leg. But between the tail and that back leg, it's not really a hard edge, it's a soft edge. And we can make that softer, and it pushes that leg back. It also gets our eye off of the contrast of that leg. So then we're not looking at that leg the whole time. We're looking at this leg, which I need to cut away. And I might want a hard edge right here, but not up above. And I want a hard edge there. Actually, I don't want this to be a hard edge. But does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, let's wrap it up now. So, oh good. I'm glad this was helpful. Do I just call you Grant, or do you have a name that you go by that starts with W by any chance? Feel free to share. Otherwise, I'll just call you W. Grant. I am so happy that this was helpful to you. Wonderfilled Wednesday continues through August. I'll be here every Wednesday at 1:30. I don't know what's on our August itinerary, except we are still in Cricklewood Camp. So I'll probably have a shorebird next week, as I take some of my field studies into the studio. However, if the weather is nice next week, shall we do another plein air session? So that's plan A is if the weather is nice, I'm taking us outside. If the weather is dicey or windy or something that it just won't support my setup, then it'll be shorebirds in the studio next week. So yes, so please put that on your calendar and come 1:30 Eastern time. As I've mentioned throughout this whole thing, I am opening classes starting. I've opened our fall workshop. Registration is now open. This is the last week for early bird registration. What that means is all registration is $50 off, with the exception of the advanced techniques course, that's $100 off. Friday at midnight, it all reverts to regular registration. Courses don't start until September, so registration will go through till September 30th. I'm sorry, until August 31st, but early bird registration ends July 31st. So I will put a link in our replay if you want to check out the courses just to see if there's something that is more interesting to you. But it is deep dives into drawing. I have a pen and ink course. I have an intro to watercolor course. So we're able to spend 4 to 6 weeks. Pen and ink and intro to watercolor, which both start in October, are 6-week courses. The intro to drawing courses are 4 weeks, and we really dive in. I've got homework for you. We practice a lot. And the advanced technique course is 12 weeks long. So there might be something, or there might not be, and you're good with just what we do here at Cricklewood, and that's fine too. If you subscribe, you'll get our this post in your inbox. Otherwise, if you just keep an eye out on notes, I post on notes when the replay goes live, so you can catch it that way. The replays open during camp. All Wonderfilled Wednesday replays are open to everybody. You don't even have to be a subscriber. Yeah, so I hope to see you next week. I hope you have plans to get out for camp. If you have no idea what Cricklewood Camp is, go to our homepage and you'll see a pinned post called, I think it says something like, congratulations, you are now an artist in residence. And it will explain everything about camp. Oh, I'm seeing people in the chat saying, yes, let's go outside. Yeah, so if we can, we will, because it is really nice to sit outside and paint, and it's really helpful. I can explain things to you if we're in nature, because it can kind of be a different way to look. Hopefully you'll be out in nature too with me, so you could take your phone or whatever outside in your yard, and we can work together. If you are interested in the courses, the website is courses.mynamesuzannafisher.com, but there's also a link on the Cricklewood site, so you can always get to it that way, and I'll put a replay. I don't think it works if I put a link in here. I don't think you guys do a clicky link, but maybe you can cut and paste. Courses. Okay. Yeah, see if that works. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anything that you want me to talk about in the future? Otherwise, I say we wrap it up. If you are participating in camp, don't forget to post in the chat. I love seeing what you guys are doing. And yeah, it's a fun time. Let's make the most of summer while we can. Okay, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate spending this afternoon with you. You guys always make Wednesday so awesome. So yes, so take care. Have a good rest of your week. Have a good time in the field this weekend, and we will see each other next week, if not before. All right. Bye.